walking down the street with your head.
Mi gente, hello and welcome to Kica's Corner. My name is Kica Matos and I'm your host. On this show, we talk about our community, our city, and the world. But always, we do it through a social justice lens. 2 Saturdays ago, hundreds of people from throughout the city got together to celebrate the 50th anniversary of JUNTA for Progressive Action, which is the city's oldest Latino advocacy and services organization in New Haven. It was a night of joyous celebration and dancing. Local leaders were honored, as were the original founders of JUNTA, and one of the founders was actually there in person. We'll talk a little bit about that later. With me in the studio today is JUNTA's new-ish executive director, Daniel Reyes. He joined JUNTA a little over a year ago. I believe it was September 2018. Before coming to JUNTA, Daniel worked at a nonprofit organization in New York for 15 years called the New York Community Pantry, and he served there as its executive director. So today we're going to have a chat with Daniel about who he is and his vision for JUNTA. So Daniel, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Oh, one quick correction. I was the deputy executive director.
Okay.
At the pantry.
Okay. Thank you for that correction. So Daniel, tell us a little bit about yourself. I Googled you, and you have...
It's not true.
Well, I was going to say you have very light Google footprints. So there's not a whole lot of dirt about you, not a whole lot of information.
Yeah.
So tell us, where are you from and where you grew up?
Sure. So I was born in Mexico, but I came to Chicago when I was about 6 months old. So spent most of my life there. So I'm technically not a Chicano, but kind of the Chicano experience. So and so grew up in Chicago, and then about 20-something years ago, moved to New York. I was young and adventurous and decided to stake my claim there. So,
and why New York?
My plan was I'm gonna move to New York for a few years, and maybe I'll move to San Francisco or LA, and then I'll figure it out. But, it's really hard to make it in New York. So after a while, I was like, you know what? I'm going to stay here because I had some mild success and I'm comfortable here. So this is where I'm going to call home. So,
okay.
At least that was the plan, but obviously not, because now I'm here.
And now you're in Connecticut. And tell us what your trajectory was in New York and why the nonprofit sector.
Sure. So I started out as a high school Spanish teacher. That was my job, and taught in Minnesota. I went to undergrad in Minnesota, and then I taught in Chicago as well. But, I really didn't feel like my heart was in the classroom. It was actually outside the classroom, working with the Latino youth, working with the students of color, really kind of creating systems that empowered students to really kind of reach for that academic success and to reach for a full life. And so I just decided that what I was going to do is I was going to leave the classroom and kind of move into the nonprofit sector. So my first job was coordinating a city-funded after-school program in Chicago, in what was at the time a predominantly Latino neighborhood of the Logan Square area. It's significantly changed now, but so that's kind of how I really got started. And when I moved to New York, I didn't have a job. There was no plan. I was just like, I'm going to do it. So I then started to do similar work like I did in Chicago. Okay. Was the assistant director for community center, after school programming, academic support for children of color. So that's really kind of where it started. And then I did move down to do some supportive housing. And then I did some immigration work. And then I did some... let's see, what else did I do? And then I moved into the pantry. And so, I came there as a program director and really kind of worked my way up to the deputy executive director over the years.
And what does the pantry do?
So it is probably at the time it was the largest single site emergency food provider, but it grew over the years. And its footprint went from a small area in Manhattan to a citywide organization. And one of the things I really wanted to focus on is addressing the root issues of food insecurity as opposed to just um, pumping out food.
Right.
And so we really moved the organization from thinking about things as far as addressing need to really kind of sustainable solutions to solving those problems. And so,
Like what?
so really what we did was the food we were providing, we kind of shifted the way we were operating to really think about ways in which the items that were being provided were going to be things that were going to alleviate a household income. So
Okay.
the more cost prohibitive food items, so fresh produce, fresh milk, fresh animal protein. So these things can be cost prohibitive for households. So really setting households up in a way where they can actually not have to be in a position as to whether they're going to buy something that's calorie rich and nutrient deficient because it's cheap,
Right.
as opposed to a nutritious product.
Got it.
And then a lot around asset or resource management. So thinking about how do we connect people to resources and how do we help them maximize those resources. So it was a lot of case management, financial counseling, nutrition education and wellness as well. So really thinking about it holistically.
So from the pantry to a multi-purpose community-based organization
Yes.
in Connecticut, why Junta and why New Haven?
So I had been at the pantry for 15 years, and I tell that to folks, and they're like, "Whoa!" I'm
That's
like,
a long time
It
for
is a long
for
time.
this generation.
It is. It is. But by the time I was ready to leave, the organization had grown exponentially. It had reached a level of stasis where I felt like I was ready to think about where my next professional move was going to be. At the same time, I became the father of two twin boys, and their birth was a little difficult. They were born at 26 weeks, so they were born very premature, and it was very difficult. And so, being able to come out here and to be able to be with my kids was something that I felt was going to be, a positive for me, positive for the kids, and a positive for the moms.
So we were talking before we went live, and I said that if we were ever going to make a sitcom about your life, we would call it Two Moms, Two Kids, and a Husband.
Yes.
So your twins have two moms. Your husband lives in New York. Your kids live in Wallingford. You live in Wallingford during the week, and you live in New York during the weekend. So how do you manage to keep it all together? And have you convinced your husband that it's time to move to Wallingford?
Well, I think he's ready to move to Wallingford. We have some other issues going on. So my husband is Colombian, and we are working on his residency. So as soon as that's put in place, we're going to make a decision. But the case is active in New York, so we've got to stay in New York. But I didn't have the husband when I had the kids.
Got it. Okay.
So the husband is relatively new. My boys are 2 years old now already, and so they're doing really well. And the ability to be in New Haven and being close to my children is really important to me. But on top of that, being at Junta is something that I really, really wanted because, you work in the nonprofit sector and working in the administrative or executive levels, there's a serious absence of color
Yes.
in most administrations.
Yes.
And, I was very proud of the work that I did, but I also was always cognizant of the fact that, they brought out the Latino when they needed him.
Mhm.
They brought out the gay Latino when they needed him. They
Right.
brought out the gay man when they needed him.
Mhm.
And so for me, sometimes it was frustrating and sometimes it was disheartening. But for me, my feeling was I was doing it for the families that we were serving.
Okay.
And if what I could do was promote our message and promote the work that we're doing, and if I have to forfeit a little bit of dignity, I'm okay with it because our families are forfeiting so much more, And so I felt like I kind of took a global perspective on it and thought, all right, these days when I'm feeling really frustrated about it, I have to remember, what I'm doing it for. And so to be at Junta, which is like a Latinx organization was created by the Latino community, run by Latinos, I felt like this was an opportunity that I hadn't seen in my life. It's just not something that's as common as you think it would be.
And how does it feel to be at the helm?
It
Finally,
feels-
you're the boss. El jefe. You're the
You-
boss man.
Yes. Well, it keeps you up at night thinking about payroll, but
Yeah. Oh, yes.
I love it. And I'm actually very honored. I mean, I am very cognizant of Junta's history and its deep roots in the community. And, that really means that I have to, always operate with that sense of purpose, but in a much deeper way than I would have before, and, so it's new, it's interesting, it's unique. But it's also, I feel like it's a privilege that I'm there, and I feel very grateful for that.
So for those of us, or those of you in the audience who don't know a little bit of, who don't know much about Junta, I wonder, Danielle, if you can walk us through what Junta does,
Sure.
what its services are, and then I want to talk a little bit about the amazing party
Yes.
that you threw a few weeks ago.
Sure. So, Junta, a lot of what I've tried to bring to Junta is to embrace that multi-service dynamic that it really always was, and to understand that we need to operate with an extreme sense of purpose and embracing all Latinx communities in the greater New Haven area. I think that sometimes that can be very challenging. So we really have to work at making sure that we are being malleable and adaptable enough to meet the diverse needs.
And what are the programs that Junta offers?
So we now have 3 departments. So Junta 360, which is our social services department, is really focused on meeting acute needs for families, including our direct immigration services. So really working in a holistic way to kind of get a family to stasis so that we can really think about the real work, which, is what I think rests in Junta Rises, which is our community and economic advancement, the ways in which we can work with our families to flourish and to ensure that they can self-determine the life that they want, and establish their happiness here in New Haven. And then we have Junta Youth, which is our youth development program, and that's our after school and teen youth development, teen leadership. So really laying the groundwork for our next generation of leaders. So the hope is that the 3 departments kind of work in tandem, so that really what we're doing is taking this very holistic approach. And then Junta is now more actively working with other providers to make sure that where we don't have capacity, we can continue to create sustainable relationships with other providers so that our families get what they need in order to be successful.
You had earlier talked about being really mindful about Junta's history and the footsteps that it has. Talk to us about what Junta was all about 50 years ago and what its trajectory has been over the decades.
Sure. So,
Oh, and tell us about the amazing parties that you threw. I was so impressed.
Yeah, thank you. Well, it's interesting because Junta's 50 years old, 1969. And if you look at the backdrop, and I've talked to many folks that were around back then, and, there was a lot of racial, disquietness. There were riots. There was a lot going on. And in that backdrop, the Puerto Rican community, which was then very much the Latino community in New Haven, was, they were establishing themselves, and yet access was very difficult. And so what Junta was really created out of these community of leaders that came together and said, we need to do for ourselves in order to make sure that we have what we need to be in order to be successful. And so, there was Gumercindo or Gumpe del Rio, Marcos Ocasio, Pura Delgado or Vélez, and Carlos Rodriguez, who were the 4 principal founders, amongst other people, and so they really kind of used what political clout that they had and what connections they had within New Haven to create Junta, and then to really kind of work at finding ways in which families could access services and resources in a culturally and linguistically appropriate manner. So there were no Latinos on the police force. There were no Latinos in the fire department. There was nobody who spoke Spanish at the hospital. There was no one at the back then the welfare office. Nobody spoke Spanish, so folks weren't able to access those resources. And so that's really what Junta became about, and really advocating actively for these services within city government.
And what is your own vision for the organization? So 50 years later,
Yeah.
you are the ED who has, who stepped in at its 49th year, celebrated its 50th year, and you're gonna be that person who's gonna lead the organization into the second half of the century
I-
of its century. So tell us a little bit about the vision.
I think that when I came to Junta, there had been some turmoil and some transition, and really I had to kind of understand what that was and
Mhm.
understand where the challenges laid for the organization. It was going to be 50 years old, and we're a little kind of squeaky on the planks and stuff. So,
Mhm.
so I really needed to understand that, and so I really went about meeting with people, kind of getting the sense of what folks had experienced and realize that we, despite all of the great work we've done and continue to do, we haven't been able to kind of package it in a way that feels inclusive for everybody. And so I think that that's one of the first things that what I've really said about going to do is to kind of figure out, how do we make sure that as the only Latinx multi-service agency in the city, we are able to kind of address these diverse needs? And so, I think we bear that onus, and
Okay.
I'm shifting the conversation from, well, this is what we do, and sorry, it's
Mhm.
not, that's not the conversation anymore. The conversation is, what do you need us to do and need us to be in order for our communities to come together? And at the end of the day, we all have to come together because
Yeah.
the term Latinx, Latino, that's been
Mhm.
put on us.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's not even our own, because we're not a race. We're just
Yeah.
this thing, this massive umbrella, and everyone thinks of us as a block, and it's just like,
Mhm.
we're not a block.
Right.
We're a diversity, a plurality of countries and traditions and cultures and experiences, and we have to be able to embrace that.
Mhm.
And that's our challenge at Junta, and that's my vision, is that we're going to kind of take on that ownership, and we're going to kind of work with communities and bring us all together to make sure that what we're looking at is our economic, social, and civic advancement.
Beautiful. When it was first founded, Junta did a lot of advocacy for Puerto Rican migrant workers. And today it still continues to fight for the rights of immigrants. I think one of the beauties about this organization is that it doesn't just provide direct services and support for families, but it also fights for the rights
Hmm.
of the Latinx community, including people without status. And I think it's safe to say that over the last 3 years under this administration, a lot of the families that Junta serves are feeling very fearful of their own sense of safety and
Hmm.
security and their sense of belonging in this community, despite the fact that this is a city that welcomes and embraces immigrants. So, talk to us a little bit about the moment we're in and what you and Junta have been doing to support the most vulnerable immigrants in our community.
Sure. You know, it is, it's an incredibly disheartening. It's a sad time, quite
Yeah.
frankly. It's very sad. And, some of what we're doing, what we're really trying to do is get the message out that Junta is a safe place. New Haven is a welcoming space. It's welcoming. And really kind of getting that word out. And I think that one of the things that I'm being very purposeful about is not responding to kind of the white noise
Yeah.
in the
Yeah.
background. So much to the chagrin of a lot of reporters, I'm like, no, that's a non-story. I'm not commenting on it.
Hmm.
Because I'm not going to help feed and fuel the hysteria
Yeah.
of just whatever madness is coming out of the White House,
Hmm.
because I guess, yes, it is news, but at the same time, it's permeating into our communities and instilling fear,
Right.
stoking xenophobia, And so I don't want to do that, And so my message is not wavered, Junta is a welcoming space. New Haven is a welcoming place. People should not walk around in fear. We are here. The information is there. Where we need to be, we are standing there present. And so I think that we have to kind of in a way shield our communities from it, because otherwise it gets out of hand,
Yeah.
and that's what my biggest concern is, and that what is being called news or newsworthy is really fueling flames,
Yeah.
and I don't want to be a part of that, and I want Junta to be a part of that. So we're very much steering away from that, and where we're needed, I mean, I'm the kind of executive director that I can go from super high level meetings to dealing with the plumbing, but
Mm-hmm.
and so that means that, like, if I need to drive somebody for a hearing or for
Mm-hmm.
supervision in Hartford, we're there, I'm there, we're doing it, because you have to do, and that's just how I operate. And so everybody at Junta operates that way, and all we're trying to do is to make sure that people feel our support and they know that we will always stand there with them and for them.
Um, Talk to me a little bit about, and I still want to ask you about the party, but maybe we'll leave that one for
Sure.
last. What are your impressions of New Haven?
It's kind of like it's like a microcosm of New York City, quite frankly. I mean, the diversity, it's an incredibly diverse community. And I think a lot of the challenges that I saw over the years that were facing New York City very much are facing New Haven. But what I think the unique thing about New Haven is that New Haven is at 9 million people, and so there's actually the capacity to have significant impact here. The capacity for all of us to come together and affect change at a macro level.
Mhm.
And within the confines of what we call metropolitan New Haven. And so part of me is heartened by that, and I'm in awe at how kind of active the city is, and how much you know even as communities don't always kind of intermingle, they're not afraid to do that. It's just a question of how do we kind of create the systems where people can actually cross those barriers. And I think that's what we've been, which is interesting about New Haven. So
And you diplomatically have avoided the biggest question, which is, do you actually like New Haven?
Oh, I love New Haven.
You're
I
listening.
love New Haven.
Oh, good. Okay. Thank you, Daniel. You're listening to Kica's Corner on WNHHLP 103.5 FM, broadcasting live from downtown New Haven. We're streaming live on TuneIn Radio and newhavenindependent.org. We're also streaming live video on Facebook Live. Just go to facebook.com/New Haven Independent, or you can simply go to your Facebook page and look us up. And my guest this afternoon is Daniel Reyes, who's the Executive Director of Junta for Progressive Action. So tell me about this amazing party, and talk to me also about Pura Delgado.
Sure. So we had our 50th anniversary, and I really wanted to kind of re-envision what this would look like. And I wanted us to go back to our roots as well. So one of the things is that we haven't had a long history of our awards, and we kind of like named the awards after, we fit who we wanted to honor. And for better or for worse, that just kind of was Junta's way of doing things.
Mm-hmm.
And I really felt like we are the oldest organization in the state, quite frankly.
Mhm.
So, we should operate with that sense of purpose. And so I wanted to create awards to celebrate leaders who had demonstrated commitment to the advancement of Latinx communities across the state.
Okay.
And in order to do that, I wanted to kind of go back to our roots and embrace those leaders who founded Junta. And so the 4 awards were named after the 4 principal founders of Junta. One was more of a legacy award, someone who's done a lifetime achievement, a leadership award, a partner award, somebody who's directly partnered with Junta, and then a trailblazer award. Those folks that are kind of paving the way for the next generation of leaders. And so we were very, very lucky to have Pura Delgado, who is one of she's the last surviving of the 4 founders. Her health hasn't always been in the best place for her, but come hell or high water, she was ready to come.
She was fabulous.
She was.
And tell us a little bit about Pura's history.
So, I was always struck by the fact that when you kind of listen to the story of Junta, only one woman comes to mind. One woman's name comes off everybody's mouth. There were many women there, but there's, and if you think about Latino leaders, we don't always have this strong history of inclusiveness between the genders. And
Yep.
so here was this strong woman who had a voice that people listened to and respected. Not only that, she was one of the few women who owned her own business. And so I think that she in essence epitomized what where New Haven was going, quite frankly, back in 1969. And so, but I mean, everyone says she was a force to be reckoned with.
Wasn't she a young lord?
I think so. So she was quite. She got around a little bit, So she was very
And sorry
active.
for listeners who don't know, young lords. The young lords were the Latinx equivalent of the Black
Black
Panther
Panthers.
Party.
Yeah.
So very radical, progressive advocates who were fighting for justice for the Latinx community.
Yes, yes. So and she was very much the fuel to the fire, because she was very much, Gumpe was very much the politician, and he was, the one making the city connections, but the person kind of pushing the trajectory, that was Buddha. So it was interesting.
Did you have a chance to talk to her?
I did. I was a little afraid because people said that she's very direct, but I must have caught her on a good day because she was very happy and she was very lovely. And I almost broke down into tears when she started to talk. I was like, I can't handle it.
She was very passionate and eloquent, and she's the mother of a well-known New Haven leader, Alicia Caraballo, who
Yes.
has a really impressive history of community activism by her own virtue.
Yes, exactly. And that's why I felt it was only fitting that her daughter received the first award that was going to be named after her mother.
Beautiful. Unfortunately, we are coming to the end of the show, and as is my practice with my guests, it's time to get personal.
Okay.
Danielle's looking a little frightened. All right, here goes. Who is your shiro or hero, and why?
My mother. My father died when I was 8 years old, and there were 4 of us, and I can't imagine how that woman kept us afloat, but she did. So.
And where does she live now?
She's in Chicago.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you go home much?
No, not really. They usually want to come this way.
Okay. So she's been to New Haven?
No, she has not been in New Haven yet. So, soon.
Okay. If you could have a superpower, what would it be?
Read minds.
Interesting. If you could have one wish granted, what would you wish for?
I would wish that my sons have everything that they desire.
And finally, assuming that you've been here for long enough to have tasted New Haven pizzas at their finest, and I'm gonna
oh no,
guess that you have not. So let me try it anyway. Sally's, Pepe's, or Modern Pizza? Do you have a favorite yet? Oh, you can be honest and say you haven't eaten it.
I haven't eaten any of those yet.
So let me ask you, what's your favorite restaurant in New Haven?
Let's see. I really like Te Amo Tequila. I like that place. And Pacifico.
Okay. Folks, this brings us to the end of our show. Thank you for listening. And Danielle, thank you for being on the show. Until the next one, here is wishing you justice and many, many days of sunshine.